Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Romeo and Juliet. In this video, I'm going to be taking you through the significance and function of the prologue, focusing on the key themes of the play that it introduces. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start off by thinking about what a prologue actually is. Well, dictionary definition, it's a separate introductory section of a literary, dramatic or musical piece of work. So what does it do? It introduces main ideas, key themes, it might introduce a set of characters, it might give some sort of context or backstory, it might give us a bit of a hook, it might create some foreshadowing. All of these are reasons that a writer would choose to include a prologue. So either to hook you in, to give you information that you need to know beforehand, to introduce some key themes or characters. So in this play, we have an absolute tell-all. It's a spoiler, a massive spoiler, but that in itself is very effective. Let's start just by having a little reread of the prologue. It should be up in front of you. Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage, the which if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. What a groundbreaking thing to do at the very beginning of this play. Shakespeare tells his audience that our protagonists, our star-crossed lovers, that they are going to die. So we know from the outset that these two people will lose their lives, that it is a tragedy, meaning that the audience is going to be sensitive to all of the hints and the clues of what's happening, and we're really going to have the tragedy and the pathos of their death emphasized to us. Let's start having a little look at it in a bit more detail. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about the form of the prologue. Now, you might have already noticed a couple of things about this. You might have already started to pick up things about the rhyme scheme and the meter. You might have thought a little bit about how many lines we have in the prologue, and you might have already come to the realization that we are dealing with a Shakespearean sonnet. So not only do we open in this unusual way of telling all, but we use a very, very traditional form that was created, or this particular version of the sonnet, created by Shakespeare. He didn't create the original, but this is his take on it. So how do we know that it's a sonnet? So a Shakespearean sonnet has these key features. 14 lines long. Okay, so you count up the lines, yeah, there's 14. Now those 14 lines should be split up into 4 sections. 3 quatrains and 1 rhyming couplet. A quatrain is of course a verse with 4 lines. Think quattro or quatre. Yeah, so 4 lines is a quatrain, and then a rhyming couplet. And if you look at this, you can see, yeah, here we have our first 4, and look, it's marked with terminal caesura or full stop. Next 4, and then our rhyming couplet. And in terms of our meter, we're dealing with iambic pentameter, which we know Shakespeare used a lot in his plays, often through blank verse. And if you can't remember what iambic pentameter is, that's when you have 5 feet or 9 to 10 syllables in one line, where the stress falls on every second syllable. Okay, so this is a very, very typical feature of the Shakespearean sonnet and Shakespeare's general writing. Now you might think to yourself, all right, well that's nice, cool, some terminology, but what's the point? Well, sonnets are associated with love. You know, Shakespeare's sonnets that he wrote, his collection of sonnets, they're all centered around relationships. So by using the sonnet form, what Shakespeare is doing is saying ultimately this is a story about love. However, when you then look at the content, which we will momentarily, we realize that it's not just about love, it's also about hate. The sonnet form emphasizes the love, but the content of it emphasizes the sense of conflict. Let's look at the way that it begins. Two households, both alike in dignity. So dignity here means status. In fair Verona, where we lay our scene. So Verona is a place in Italy. Okay, so Shakespeare's basically saying right there, you've got these two families, they're the same status, they both of these families live in Verona. That's where the play is set. Note the fact that Shakespeare is choosing to set the play in Italy, which means that he can perhaps get away with being a little bit more controversial because it's not on British soil. So no monarchy is going to be upset with any kind of societal comment he might be making. Okay, let's start looking a bit at the features. So we've got this wonderful juxtaposition in the third line. From ancient grudge, break to new mutiny. So the juxtaposition comes from these adjectives here, from ancient to new. Okay, so ancient meaning well back in the past, and new meaning current. So we've got the juxtaposition, but what these adjectives are modifying or describing are these abstract nouns, grudge and mutiny. So a grudge is like a complaint that you have. You hold a grudge, don't you? Grudges seem sort of quite petty in some ways. You've got to be in your bonnet and you're holding on to it. So we've got this idea that this conflict has started from a long time ago, but now it's breaking out into new mutiny. Okay, so another word that's really associated with conflict and violence. So we're learning here in that first stanza that this fighting between these two families not only has been going on for a very long time, but it's born out of something that perhaps isn't even that worthy, and it's breaking out into really kind of current new fighting, backed up with this little bit of repetition where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. So the word civil here is being played with because civil means of the same place. So you think about civil war, that's when there's fighting within a country. So these are the civilians within Verona that are fighting together, but we'll also think about the word civil meaning, kind and courteous. So there's a sense that this is what they should be. They should be kind and courteous. They should be united, but instead they are fighting. We've got this metaphor here about the idea about the hands being unclean, as in they're all sort of tainted, corrupted by this same fight. Okay, next quatrain. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. So we've got this really nice fricative alliteration here. You can just call it alliteration. Fricative is the word that describes the sound, and it's only relevant if you can say something sensible about it. And I think in this case, it just sounds quite angry. It's got quite a harsh sound. And what it's also doing is drawing together some of these words, forth, fatal, foes. Okay, now here in this case, what we've got is this sort of oxymoron, I suppose, being used, the fatal loins. So fatal, you think of death, don't you? That's what the adjective suggests. And loins means like reproduction, like when you talk about the loins, you mean the baby making bits. So what we've actually got here is a kind of juxtaposition between life and death in fatal and loin. So it's basically saying that these two families, they may be producing life, but they're bound to die, fatal. And obviously what we're doing here is using symbolism to talk about Romeo and Juliet. Foes here means enemy. Okay, so again, we're being reminded of this conflict. And here we have a pair of star-crossed lovers. Why star-crossed? It's to do with fate, because they believe that you could see the future mapped out in the stars. So these lovers, Romeo and Juliet, are star-crossed. They are fated. And sadly, it's fated to take their lives. It's our first indication that this is going to be suicide that ends them. Whose misadventured, piteous overthrow, so this sort of means unlucky, yeah? So the unlucky, horrible things that happen to them do with their death bury their parents' strife. We've got this massive irony here, because obviously strife is another word for conflict, it's their argument, and it's only with death, the ultimate kind of end, that this argument is able to be resolved. So also being told here in the prologue, not only are they going to die, but actually this feud is going to be over, but it will only be over because of their sacrifice. Third quatrain, the fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2-hour traffic of our stage. Notice again, we've got this kind of idea about the juxtaposition between love and hate, and we've got this kind of this metaphorical bit of foreshadowing, death-marked love. You know, their love has been marked by death, again reminding us that this is going to happen no matter what. We've got this metaphor of the traffic of the stage. It's quite meta here. Shakespeare's drawing attention to the fact that this is a play that is being staged, and he's saying this is the story that is now going to be the traffic of the stage. It's now what you're going to see in front of you. You're going to see this idea that the children's end, another kind of a euphemism for death, is the only thing that will get rid of this parent's rage. So that's what we're going to be dealing with. And then the final rhyme and couplet, the which of you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. So yeah, rhyme and couplet here to end the sonnet form of the prologue. And again, it's a reminder about what we're going to see. It's a reminder that everything that we've been told is about to be presented. I think the fact that he uses this abstract noun toil here is quite a narrative hook, because it tells us that, you know, it's going to be hard, there's going to be struggle in what we're seeing here. It's another little reminder as well that Romeo and Juliet as a story came from source material, that, you know, although Shakespeare has obviously added things and changed things around, he has taken the story from source material. So there's a reminder that perhaps the audience of the time, the contemporary audience, might already know a bit of the story. So they're basically saying here, anything that you didn't know, we'll add in. Okay. In this prologue, there are some very convincing, compelling language patterns for you to identify, and they are all to do with conflict. You can break them down a little bit further. You can think about marking out words that are to do with death, marking out words that are to do with arguments, marking out words that are to do with violence. But all of these things kind of come under the umbrella term of conflict. So if you have a little look, we've got grudge, mutiny, blood, fatal, foe, overthrow, death, strife, fearful, death-marked, rage, end, and toil. So all wildly negative terms. And like I said right at the beginning, these are negative terms that are sown throughout a sonnet which is associated with love. So what Shakespeare is doing here is right from the outset saying, this is a play about love and hate. This is a play about love and conflict. Almost like saying you can't have one without the other. Final little thoughts from me. So what themes have been introduced to us? Obviously the idea of fate. We've got all of this idea about them being star-crossed, there being the idea of a passage, everything is moving towards the sense of death. Obviously we've got conflict, we're setting up the feud between the two families, the Montagues and the Capulets, and demonstrating that closeness between the ideas of love and hate. Out of hate, love will spring, but can it last? And on that note, life and death. Okay, so yeah, it's not just the whole fatal loins, it's the fact that all the way through this, you know, love, particularly, you know, for the contemporary audience, love and marriage, it's all about producing life, isn't it? It's all about making babies. But here we're being told that with love and therefore life comes death. It's quite depressing really to start us off. There are some quite lovely moments in the play as well, I promise. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. If you've got any questions, do just pop them in the comments and I will come back to you. This is the first video of a series of videos that are going to take you through each scene of Romeo and Juliet, and then there'll be some extra videos on character and theme. Do subscribe if you haven't already, and do have a look at my playlist as well, where you're going to find more videos on English literature, language at GCSE and at A-level level. That's it. Thank you so much for watching. Happy revising.